Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the TNC podcast. I cannot wait to get stuck into this conversation today with a football writer for over 35 years. He's covered England at 9 World Cups, a specialist correspondent of the year at the British Sports Journalism Awards in 04, 09, 2010 and 2013, football writer of the year in 2016, 2022 and 2023, English Ballon d'Or judge for 21 years, shortlisted for the 2025 FSA Football Writer of the Year. Basically, this bloke is the creme de la creme of football coverage. Ladies and gents, boys and girls, welcome to the TNC podcast. Henry Winter, how are you doing?
I'm very good. My shoes are off, having been invited into your house and having seen how respectfully Ben Knapper treated you. Shoes absolutely off and left at the door. Preserve your beautiful accents, the carpets.
What a way to kick things off. Henry, of course, the reason why I've managed to fortunately get you to agree to this is you recently sat down with our sporting director, Ben Knapper, for an in-depth discussion about our club's future. Firstly, I'd be fascinated to hear how it all came about, because Norwich City fans aren't used to seeing an external journalist interviewing on club content. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was doing a podcast of my own in London. I got a call from Dan, as you call him, Dan, the media man, who is I've known from Bournemouth and where else is he? Bolton, going back a few years. He always had huge respect for Dan, a lot of affinity for the club from my perspective. I mean, the first game I saw at Carrow Road was a 5-3 thriller against Aston Villa, who I think Martin Peters played before he went on and became back-to-back Player of the Year with you. Ted McDougall hat-trick, who Brian Lett was playing for Villa. I mean, I had to go and check these dates because I was very young at the time, but I can remember. So I've always had that affinity. A lot of my relatives are season ticket holders. Probably calling for Ben Knapper out. And we had a house in Haysborough, well, a hut until it fell in the sea, thanks to the erosion. So yeah, I spent a lot of time up there, in the holidays. Always had an affinity for Norwich. Know Delia and Michael well. When they called, I mean, I do a lot of things with fans podcasts because you guys are, well, the present, let alone the future. So they contacted me, and I only had two stipulations: was that there was no restriction on questions, because when Liam Manning, because I know Liam, and I actually thought at the time it was probably quite a good appointment. I thought it was a bit of a coup, and it didn't work out for various reasons, as you covered with Ben in your excellent podcast interview with him. But I've been critical of Ben. Obviously, I'd followed his career at Arsenal, and I just thought, well, you kind of give people a right to reply. So it was nice to sort of go on and ask him those questions. The club were absolutely brilliant. There was absolutely no restriction on questions. They offered me a fee, which there's absolutely no way, as a journalist, you can't take money from clubs. So instinctively against that. I work on the EFL community judging panel, so I know the work that the club do. I was at an event earlier this year at the House of Commons where you guys picked up another award for the amazing community work. So all those reasons, the sort of, the respect, and also, I mean, an opportunity to go and have a look around Colney, which I know has changed since they put a fair bit of investment in 2019, and then under Stuart Webber, and obviously more recently under Ben Knapper. So yeah, just that opportunity to go behind the curtain, as it were, and learn a little bit more. And fair play to the club. I think they just felt that they needed a kind of a neutral voice on it. So yeah, and look, I got so much respect for Dan and the club. I think that's what it came down to.
What were your first impressions walking in, Henry? Because obviously you'd had a little snoop around the training ground, but what was the vibe like? I don't know whether it was just because Ben was speaking to us on our kind of more emotional, I guess, fan channel. It was quite tense with us. But I'd love to know what it was like with you and the people that you came across and the conversations that you had with those people.
I mean, I guess he was in his own setting, his lair, as it were. We were in the sort of, the players' meeting room, and we just sort of sat there. Obviously, there were sort of cameras everywhere, and they were following us around. But we went and had a chat with in his office beforehand, and had a chat about the injuries and Arsenal, and obviously, you guys know absolutely everything about him, everything that goes on in the club, because you've got contacts and because it's your passion. I know you've got another job, but Norwich City is huge. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm a sort of rather exhausted parent of 92 unruly children, looking after the sort of the EFL and the Premier League. So I sort of go in there with kind of an open mind, really. I mean, I was very fortunate. I mean, so I live near Peterborough, so I had a 2-hour drive, and I obviously done research before getting into the car, but I listened to your excellent podcast about the succession, who should succeed Liam Manning, which was really interesting, A, because of the insight, but B, also because of the emotion. I mean, look, I really like Norwich City as a club, but, they're not my club. I don't have Norwich in my blood like you do, so I needed to feel the sort of the emotional element that you guys are feeling, that you and Jack are feeling, that my cousins are feeling, that everyone around is feeling, because there's a unique nature with one club cities, and I had to sort of understand that properly. So going in, talking to Ben first in his office and just relaxing. I mean, I instinctively got on with people. I mean, remember, we all have issues with each other, and social media whips up the sort of the frenzy even more. And I understand that. And football's tribal. Football's so important. And I think, strangely, maybe it's a bigger issue, but football's become even more important in people's lives post-COVID, because they saw what football could do in terms of helping the community. And that sort of emotional element, and everyone's got a platform now to pour out their feelings, either through following you or on social media. It was, and I had a perception of Ben, and not having met him before, and I just wanted to sort of understand him a little bit better. Plus, there's a broader issue here, is that I think it's really important that young English professionals step into the game, whether it's into the dugout, whether it's into boardrooms, whether into sporting directors' roles, and they do well. And that's not a sort of flag waving exercise. I just think economically, emotionally, I think it's important. Why else do you spend 120 million quid on St. George's Park? That's not really about player development. It's about sporting directors have courses there, coaches have courses there. So it's all about it. It's all about those elements. So instinctively, as I'm sure you would, as a Norwich City fan, you want Ben Knapper to do well, because it's good for your club. From my perspective, it's good for a club I hugely respect and have a fondness for, but it's also good for English football. And if he is struggling, which he clearly has been, hence the round of interviews with you and me and others, you want him to do well. So I guess that was the sort of the background. But I came into it as a neutral, as a slightly sort of gnarled old journalist who's not going to be fobbed off with with cheap answers. As I'm sure I know, because I listened to your excellent interview with him. I mean, yours was more animated, more emotional, because you've got all that in you. So, but there were certain things that I was going, well, hang on a sec, why are you saying that? So I would dive in occasionally. I tend to do long, waffly, sort of broad style questions, but then sort of nip in and say, well, you can't get away with that. You might be able to do that on television occasionally, but you've got to call people to account, which is what we do.
We are going to go into that, Henry. I'm fascinated to get your insight in terms of the questions and how it worked. But I wanted to ask you about your gut feeling of Ben. And I think it's worth adding at the top of this, and we've said this in our podcast before, we like Ben as a bloke. We get on with him. I always like someone that's got a firm handshake, for example, right? So, but someone can still, not perform at their job at an ideal level, but, still be a good bloke, right? So I think it's important that we say that, because I think people might perhaps be watching and listening to this going, cool, yeah, they're turning the knife on Ben. That's not what it's about. It's just getting an insight in terms of the interview. And I wanted to ask you about his demeanor, Henry, and also his communication style. And perhaps to kind of add another question on top of that, is he someone that presents as someone that, with a strong plan, or perhaps someone that is still kind of searching for a coherent strategy?
I think a lot of it reflects on his own experience at at Arsenal, where he was working with young players, William Saliba. I mean, one of his strengths, and the players he's worked with, certainly on when he was loans manager at Arsenal, will tell you he's very good one-to-one. I mean, in terms of doing the research, the human contacting Saliba and all the other Arsenal players who were sort of scattered around Europe and the UK, and just sort of saying to them, I said, well, listen, I watched your game. I just thought you were really good in this incident. Well played there. Maybe you could work on that element. So I think the human side of him and the work ethic side, absolutely no question about. And he went out to Marseille to see Saliba in meetings with Arteta in particular, and with Edu, sporting director of Arsenal at the time. Ben Knapper would be, banging the drum for Saliba. And I think one or two Arsenal fans would tell you at the time, so what on earth is Arteta not picking him? So I think you could argue, certainly on the Saliba case, that he's a good judge of players. But then it's a totally different thing when you're actually committing your owner's money to going out. I think, just coming back to your point about strategy, I think his strategy is, and might reflect his sort of his loans experience, is going with younger players, it seems to be, and going for younger players abroad where there are more gems which you can Brighton style sort of polish up and sell on and benefit from that trading model. But I think the issue when you bring young players, particularly from overseas, into the Championship, not simply, possibly bizarrely easier to bring them into the Premier League, where they might get a little bit more time and it's not quite as physical, although there are issues there. Look at Florian Wirtz. But in the Championship, which is just relentless, I mean, game after game, the physicality, traveling all over the country, that is quite a culture shock. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next transfer window, because I think there'll be as much Philippe Clement signings, possibly a little bit more experience, a little bit more physically ready, a little bit more battle hardened to come in, which is what you need. So yeah, I got the impression of someone who really wants to be a top sporting director one day, but he's still learning. He's 38. It was only 15 years ago that he was captaining Hull University with Graham Potter as his very young coach. So yeah, look, I absolutely want him to do well. I can understand where his strategy is coming from, but I would be slightly concerned as owners about the experience level. And I should have said this to him at the time, because we had a really good chat before and after, as well as during the interview, was that I'm slightly surprised that, and I don't think he's got one, like a mentor figure. He might have told you that he does have, but just looking at this as ever with the benefit of hindsight, someone like Dan Ashworth, who obviously knows the club, came through the ranks, and then went and sort of coached and did sporting director roles locally or further afield, but certainly in the East Midlands rather than East Anglia, and then went on to sort of great things, fairly short things at some clubs, and he's now back at the Football Association. But I think everyone needs a mentor in life, whether it's you're starting out as a journalist, and there's certain people you look up to and you can take advice from, a sounding board, and particularly in such a brutal, scrutinized world as being a sporting director, particularly at a young age. I don't know. I mean, look, he may well have people that he relies on, but he is swimming in a shark-infested pool when he is dealing with agents. And look, he'll have good connections with agents, but it is a really difficult world. And of course, all your successes and failures are played out very publicly.
Lots of interesting thoughts there, Henry. That's for sure. And we could dig deeper, and I'm sure that we will. I'm fascinated to get your gut instinctual take on the thing that impressed you the most about him, but then also what was maybe the thing from your interview that most concerned you that he perhaps didn't say?
I mean, you would be the better judge of that, because you know absolutely everything about the sort of the landscape and the narrative around the club. I mean, there were certain things I missed out. I should have pushed him more on Marcelino Nunes. I mean, how on earth? I mean, I know the rivalry between Norwich and Ipswich. I've been in the boardroom of both on, on East Anglian derby games after the match, and I just know the tension there, even with a sort of a lovely person like Delia, who would absolutely want to win, or David Sheepshanks at Ipswich, or Mark Ashton there now, and these are watching. And so to sell a player like that, I mean, would you get 10 million from him or something? So I mean, you probably got.
Yeah, I think it was like 7.5 with add-ons, so it wasn't really 10, really.
Okay, and he scored last night, I think. So,
of course.
Yeah. So sorry, I'm trampling on your grave here, but that was. I mean, sometimes you've got to read the room, and okay, it might have been a good financial deal, and the player himself might have wanted the move, but read the room. Jurasek, I don't think. I mean, was he subbed on and subbed off last night?
Disaster last night. Absolute disaster. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's poor, and I mean that's Philippe Clement. I think he deserves credit for the Clement appointment. First, I think he's quite a coup to have got him, particularly the situation at Norwich in 23rd. But this is a good coach. He showed that in Europe, showed that briefly at Rangers before they stopped giving him the money to invest properly. So I've sort of slightly moved away from your question in terms of my gut feeling about him. He's young, but what I thought was good, and this is something that Dan and Zoe Webber and others at the club have clearly realised, they need to get him to open up more to you, because the club doesn't belong to Ben Knapper, it belongs to you. You will be there, and generations to come, you will be there. So that's why I think it was good to hear that he went over to your house. I think he spoke to the BBC and others, and I think that's really important, partly to build up that relationship. And he did actually say that when Manning went, he said we have to sort of address the also rebuild or repair, I think was the word he used. And you know what? You're not the only club who's going through this at the moment. It is an issue at all clubs, a distance between owners and boards and fan bases, whether it's over ticket prices, whether it's over kickoff times, whether it's over the attack on concessions, which we've seen at West Ham and Spurs, less so in the Championship. But the clubs belong to you, and COVID highlighted that.
I'm going to ask you about the supporters, Henry, in a second, actually, because I think it's a very important thing to talk about, whether he can build the bridge or not. But of course, you've had conversations with Ben now, and of course, much or all of that will have to remain private, I think it's fair to say. But what's your gut instinct, or what would you be able to kind of impart upon our fan base here with regards to the January transfer window? You've kind of hinted at little nuggets there around we're perhaps going to sign experience, etc. From a supporter perspective now, I think it's fair to say, I really do think it's fair to say that the majority of supporters are now going, bloomin' heck, this guy has spent, 50 million is the kind of one that's mentioned. Mark Atanasio came on a Canary Call special on BBC Radio Norfolk and said it was more towards 70 that he'd invested since he'd arrived too. Much of that has been under Ben Knapper. Do you think it's going to be too little too late for Ben Knapper at Norwich City when it gets to the January window, Henry?
Well, there's a dressing room cliche that the truth is always on the pitch. And if the results turn, then moods will turn. I mean, obviously, listening to your podcast, listening to what you've been saying, following Norwich fans like you on social media, and the reaction to, when I've tweeted about Norwich, I think there are a lot of fans who, it's very difficult to turn their views. But if Norwich start climbing up the table, I mean, I said to him, has Philippe Clement come in to sort of save the club from relegation and to save you from the sack? And fair play to the club, they happily accepted all those sort of questions, because that's at the heart of the matter. I think Philippe Clement has come in to save Ben Knapper's job. I mean, so on the positive side, I will say, look, he cares. He clearly cares about the club, about doing well, about not making mistakes. And as you know better than I do, Jurasek, he has made clear mistakes in recruitment. But I actually think and I had an issue with him. I've known Jack Wilshere since he was a fantastic teenager coming through at Arsenal. And I interviewed Jack shortly after he got the Luton Town job. And he'd been, I do a radio show, and he'd been on that before and talked about, in fact, when he was at Norwich, because he was running the London Marathon.
Yeah,
absolutely, because of his amazing daughter. And so anyway, I went to sort of see him, partly congratulate him on doing the London Marathon, because he'd only just about recovered. And I was saying, well, why didn't you get the job? Because he came in for 2 caretaker roles, didn't he, towards the end of the season, and he won one and he drew the other, and he seemed to get a good reaction from you guys and fans generally. The players obviously responded to him. Jack's such a sort of likable character. And people always look about, oh, you know, we see this sort of cheeky chappy who likes a sort of cigarette or whatever. But actually, I've been interviewing him since he was 17, 18. And really intelligent individual, really thought about the game. And I thought, well, you know, there's a chance there. So I was a bit annoyed that he hadn't got the role. He was obviously annoyed that he wasn't given the chance. So I put that to Ben as well, and he said, well, I just couldn't take a risk. And you know, with an inexperienced manager. And I don't think at the time, and you'd know better than me, whether there was much criticism of the Liam Manning appointment. I think people thought it was quite a coup. Philippe Clement is definitely a coup. And I think, I mean, you would have been there last night. It sounded like there was a little bit more organisation, a little bit more positivity about the play, frustrating late goal. Was it 95th minute or something that Oxford equalised? You know, that's... Yeah, is that not? Is it?
Yeah, just don't talk about it, Henry. I'm not over it yet.
Okay. Well, you know, that's... But the fact is, sorry, unbelievably, the sunshine's come out.
Yeah,
and that is football for you. That, you know, it rains, but the sun will come out briefly. So I just think there's, you know, it will come down to results. Gut feeling: should Norwich City fans be positive? I think it all comes down to one man now, Philippe Clement. And I think and I'm sure he will have looked at that squad and goes, right, you're not fit enough. You know, there are 4 or 5 players who've been brought in who are simply not good enough. Let's ease them out on loans in January, bring some players in. But the other key man in all this, as you mentioned his interview with BBC Radio Norfolk, is Mark Attanasio. Because, you know, this is effectively his money. I think he said in that interview that he was almost like he was watching. And I put that to Ben. I said, listen, are you being watched by the owner? And he sort of talked about his relationship with him and how, you know, they talk regularly. And but yeah, I think he's got to deliver.
I'm so with you on that. I couldn't agree more, Henry. I wanted to ask you, like, kind of to transition now into kind of Norwich City from the national perspective, especially your position, right? You've been there, done that, and got the T-shirt and experienced all sorts of clubs, all sorts of shapes and sizes over the years. I think there's this feeling amongst the Yellow Army that there is this kind of, maybe disrespect's a bit strong, because of course they appreciate the supporters, but there's this feeling of perhaps maybe disregard, or there's an emotional disconnect between the club and the supporters. And I wanted to ask you whether you felt, given what's happened, that is justified, or do you think that Norwich City fans are overreacting right now?
No, it's your club. You're 23rd. You know, you look at some of the seasons in the sun, however briefly you've had, being up in the Premier League. Yeah. I mean, whenever I look at Norwich City's attendances, you know, you're always full. You always turn up. I remember, did you play Chelsea shortly after Abramovich?
Yes, we did, because there was a whole hoo-ha about we weren't allowed to hold Ukrainian flags up in the stands because they would offend them.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I went to that game, and the atmosphere was absolutely electric. I mean, you were battering the Chelsea fans verbally, and they were giving some stick back. And I don't know whether it's because where the press box is, there's some fairly lively fans in the corner to our left. Is that the snake? Is that a snake pit there?
That's the snake pit, Henry. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's normally the press box that's the snake pit. But yeah, so there's a lot of noise there, and I like clubs and grounds and respect them most where the noise comes from all around, and that happens at Carrow Road. And I know, I've got absolutely lovely cousins who are but I know they get how emotional they get on match days, and rightly so. So how are Norwich perceived by? I don't know whether I'm the best person to ask, because I've got a fondness for the club. I think there's huge respect for Norwich because you do things the right way. You've developed players. I think we all go into press boxes and you see a Dean Ashton, you see obviously Martin O'Neill's, doing other work now at Celtic, but no Martin Brian Gunn, all these people that you associate with a club, you just have huge respect for. And I think I don't think it's a patronizing view from a national perspective. I just think there's this perception that Norwich is just such a great city, a fine city, as they call it on the signpost, such a great county. And again, I'm biased because I had millions of holidays as a kid, running up and down sand dunes from Brancaster to Haysborough. But it's just, I can understand why players, when they towards the tail end of their career, they go to Norwich. The schools are good. The Broads are 10 miles away, and my cousins have got a place at Horning, and it's just the most magical place to go and to be. And if you want a work-life balance, you could then say, well, is that an issue with the ambition of some of the older players who, in their late 20s who come to the club? But actually, it's a compliment. They've always done things with a bit of class. I mean, the Robert Chase era, which probably a bit before your time, I certainly remember that. But Delia and Michael, they do things with a bit of class, and they've always, and you can have a change in ownership, but it takes a bit of while to change a culture of a club. And so the DNA of the club is, I would say, looking at it from afar, is of a community club with a passionate fan base. No one can absolutely just dispute that. Good ground, always a good pitch, training ground having a bit more investment in, just going through a difficult time.
Okay, that's good to hear, Henry, because I think there's this kind of growing feeling amongst the fans that we're almost becoming a bit of a laughing stock, because we've gone from like this yo-yo motion to now this horrific form, 23rd in the division, spent loads of money. It's really good to hear, quite validating to hear that, Henry. So thank you. Earlier, you touched upon something around communication, Henry, actually. And on social media, in fact, you said that some other clubs should follow Norwich's example on being so open. I wanted to kind of push you on that a little bit. Are Norwich City actually open compared to other clubs? And surely, for me, I don't think I've got my yellow and green glasses on when I say, surely like the bare minimum for a club that actually cares about their fans, the leadership should be proactively getting their leadership out on camera, communicating their mission, vision, values for the football club, right?
Yeah, definitely. But two things on that. First, they've got to work hard, to do well for the club. And so they can't be running around giving sort of interviews to you and me the whole time. But absolutely, that communication and that sort of comment on social media was simply about, in this case, that, having listened to your interview and heard the sort of, the general reaction was, well, look, it was good that he spoke. We still got one or two reservations, but actually he was able to put his case across. So, I think clubs should communicate more. I think it's we've got fan advisory boards. Well, one of the reasons why the independent football regulator is coming in is to rebuild relations between, the stands, the fans, and the boardrooms, because I think maybe whether it's overseas owners, whether it's just a sort of general trends, but absolutely the fans deserve that communication.
And Henry, you said it in your interview. You and I'm so pleased you did. You brought up the protests. Do you really see a way back for? Like, as I say, I want to really make this clear. It's nothing personal towards Ben. I like Ben. I'm just now thinking, when you've got so many people inside and outside the stands, in a couple of games this season, literally protesting, wanting you out. Do you see a way back for Ben at Norwich City?
Results. honestly, if you go on a winning run and his judgment is vindicated in terms of the appointment of Philippe Clement, then I think, things can turn. But he's got to have a good transfer window. He's got to have a good run for the team. But I think talking to you, I mean, it's all very well sort of getting me in just to sort of ask some questions, but it's important that he has a relationship with you, with the Pinkham, with,
yeah.
Yeah, with it's really important to have that connection. But and if that's just like 50 minutes a week when, you take your shoes off going into his office and just have a chat, then I think that, that is good. But his main job is to get recruitment right.
Of course, and the jury will be out in that January. Henry, coming to the end of this conversation now, thank you so much for your time. I wanted to ask you, if you were to kind of step out of Henry Winter's body and get in the body of a snake pit lad, what do you think Norwich fans could, or maybe perhaps should feel, having watched your interview? Should they feel optimism? Should they feel caution, concern, excitement? I'm interested.
Well, I love the idea of being a snake pit lad. I think my days of going down to Tombland are over. What should they feel? I think the most important thing is just that general perspective, is that the club clearly realised they needed Ben Knapper to come out and talk and do some justification, and not just release statements saying we need to repair the relationship, but actually go and take a couple of steps towards that. And that is getting a gnarled old hack like me to come in and ask sort of questions. I actually said to him, he said he was going off to sort of be interviewed by you guys and fans. I said, that would just be a gentle warm-up act, a little bit of sort of pre-season kickabout compared to what you guys are going to give him, and rightly so. Because you know everything that is right and wrong about the club, and particularly wrong at the moment, and also because it's in your blood. I mean, I can get into the car and I walked down and went off to a party in London afterwards, whereas you, after your interview, obviously once you've sort of edited it, you will still be chatting with Jack about, oh, what did you make this? And Jack, have you changed your view of him? And it's 24/7 for you, and I think it's important the clubs realise that. You guys don't walk away from it. I came away with, I met Zoe Webber for the first time, and obviously knew her reputation, highly respected within football. I've interviewed Stuart a couple of times down the years. I always rather liked Stuart, but I realized that he did a couple of interviews with him, and having seen the reaction to those, I know that he sort of upset one or two people. He's quite a singular character, so it was interesting to meet Zoe. I met her in the canteen, and we swapped a couple of texts afterwards. I'm really impressed with her, partly because of what I knew of her reputation within the EFL and football generally. She's highly respected, so you've got a safe pair of hands there. So that was encouraging. Coming away, having met her, I thought, oh, you got someone good there. Overall, on Ben, he is young, and a sporting director's job is not a place for work experience, but he needs a good, strong window. He needs the team to kick on, and then I think he can be judged.
Henry, thank you so much. I just wanted to say on behalf of the Norwich City fans as well, thank you so much, because it would have been very easy for you to kind of go into that, of course, just do the kind of bare bones basics of research, but you tucked into, the heartbeat of the supporter discussion, and that really came through in your interview. We were really, really happy with your questions, and it was quite like, whoosh, blimey, like, that's going on a club channel, and just wanted to say fair play to you. And I think it's safe to say that we can take Norwich City as your second team now, that's for sure. And also, Henry, a massive thanks for coming on Talk Norwich City. Jack and I started this channel over 10 years ago now, and you making reference to TNC, Talk Norwich City, etc., in your Substack piece, and actually in your communication within the interview, massive honor for myself and Jack. So thank you so much.
Well, you guys are a reflection of how the industry has changed. I mean, it used to just be sort of, newspapers, and now it's obviously radio, online, social media, podcasts. I mean, even I've got a podcast. So yeah, I mean, it's just the way the industry is going. But I think it's so important that he spoke. And you say fair play to me. Well, I mean, I just sort of went in, had a cup of coffee, and chatted to someone, and which enhanced my knowledge of A, your club, but B, the game generally. But a fair play to the club to do that. And it'll be interesting. I know that other clubs have looked at what Dan and Norwich have done in this case, and it'll be interesting to see whether other journalists because it all comes down to trust. If they trust you and you trust them. So, but look, your podcast is brilliant, and it just shows how much people care about Norwich City, because you clearly do. And I would say finally that I think Ben Knapper does care, but he's young and he's got to learn, and he can't make any more mistakes.
Time's of the essence. Henry, thank you so much. Thank you so much to everyone that's watching this, listening to this. If you've enjoyed this conversation with the Henry Winter, can't believe I'm saying that still, a bit mental, but there we go. Talk Norwich City. Give us a 5-star review on iTunes, on Spotify, a thumbs up on YouTube. We'd massively appreciate that. And of course, let us know what you think of Henry's answers. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Tag us on @TalkNorwichCity, and I'll share all of them as a thanks for your support. Thank you again for watching TNC. Another big special interview coming up as well. Stay tuned for that one. And I'll see you this time next week for another one on the Ball City.